buzinando, faz parte da programação, na verdade faz parte da nossa vida de lives, né, gente? Isso aqui é a vida real. Bom, eu quero agradecer a todo mundo que está assistindo a nossa programação nas plataformas da Virada Sustentável e também nas plataformas digitais do Estadão. Bom, a Virada Sustentável é um movimento de mobilização para a sustentabilidade que organiza o maior festival sobre o tema no Brasil. A 10ª edição da Virada Sustentável em São Paulo acontece pela primeira vez, inédito, em modelo híbrido, físico e virtual, com uma intensa programação gratuita e com duração de 5 semanas. Não é a pandemia que vai atrapalhar o nosso trabalho de disseminação aí da sustentabilidade de um mundo mais equilibrado, né? Bom, a programação do Fórum Virada Sustentável começa hoje, agora, com a palestra imperdível da Kate Raworth, ela que é a criadora da Economia Donut. E a nossa programação segue nas próximas semanas discutindo os seguintes temas: economia circular nos dias 21 e 22 de setembro, diversidade e empoderamento no dia 30 de setembro, cidades sustentáveis nos dias 7 e 8 de setembro, e meio ambiente no dia 14 de setembro. Então agora a gente vai assistir a um vídeo especial.
Se você pudesse recriar o futuro, como ele seria? A Virada Sustentável completa 10 anos e vai ocupar São Paulo de maneira criativa e inovadora. São diversas atrações ao longo de um mês, em um formato seguro, para debater questões cada vez mais urgentes sobre meio ambiente, consumo consciente, diversidade, desigualdade e bem-estar. Virada Sustentável 2020, de 16 de setembro a 18 de outubro. Acompanhe tudo pelas redes sociais e participe!
Nossos cachorros seguem latindo aqui. Acompanhar a gente aqui nessa programação, viu? Ó, vocês estão ouvindo normal. Bom, pessoal, em um ano como 2020, é essencial, fundamental, a gente pensar no coletivo, né? E é por isso que nós estamos promovendo a campanha Virada Sustentável Solidária, que tem como objetivo apoiar cooperativas de catadores de São Paulo na retomada das suas atividades. As doações, elas vão ser destinadas à compra de EPIs, os equipamentos de proteção individual, e ao investimento em infraestrutura necessários para garantir a segurança dos cooperados. A ação conta com a parceria do Sempre, compromisso empresarial para reciclagem, responsável por receber e também por distribuir esses recursos entre as cooperativas indicadas pela Anlurb. Então, olha, por favor, fica de olho aí nesse QR Code que está aparecendo na sua tela e faça a sua doação. Ela é essencial, ela é fundamental para o sucesso dessa campanha. Combinado? Bom, dado esse recado importante, chegou então a tão esperada hora da gente repensar o futuro com a palestra da Kate Raworth, ela que é a criadora da Economia Donut. Essa palestra é oferecida pela Braskem.
Em um mundo em transformação, como reinventar nossas ações? Nosso mundo mudou, está mudando, cada vez mais rápido. Vivemos o desafio coletivo de repensar nosso jeito de fazer. Somos convocados a descobrir novas formas de avançar, formas mais coletivas, sustentáveis e circulares. Isso pode ser feito, e é um exercício constante, um exercício do agora que pode transformar nosso futuro.
Então vamos lá, eu quero dar as boas-vindas aos nossos convidados especiais. Em primeiro lugar, a economista de Oxford, a Kate Raworth, que vai realizar a nossa palestra. Hi Kate, are you in Oxford right now, right?
I am indeed, and it's lovely to join you.
Oh, thank you very much for being here with us. Well, nossos entrevistadores, a Luciana Dinievich, repórter de Economia do Estadão. Bem-vinda, Luciana. Onde estará, Luciana? Vamos ver. Can you hear me, Kate, right? Bom, a gente pode estar tendo um problema técnico que é básico e normal, acontece no momento de transmissão ao vivo, mas eu vou seguindo apresentando, então, os nossos convidados. Como eu disse, a Luciana Dinievich, repórter de economia do Estadão, Ricardo Yang, empresário, presidente do Conselho do Instituto Ethos e sustentabilista. Bem-vindo também, Ricardo. O Tomás de Lara, cofundador e diretor do Cidades Mais B e conselheiro do Sistema B. Bem-vindo também. E o nosso mediador, Matthew Shirts, editor do World Observatory e do Fervura. Um enorme prazer receber cada um de vocês aqui. Então, Matthew, é com você para a gente abrir a nossa palestra. Boa palestra a todos, gente.
Muito obrigado. Vocês estão me ouvindo bem? É um grande prazer apresentar a Kate Raworth. Kate é autora, como todo mundo deve saber, da Economia Donut. Eu a considero pessoalmente, pelo que vale, uma das maiores pensadoras do século XXI. Formato inovador da época de GIF, no Rio +20. E ele, em forma gráfica, mostra uma economia desejada em que a gente todos tem para todos e a gente não extrapola os limites ambientais. É uma maneira muito nova de pensar a economia. Esta ideia inicial foi lançada em livro em inglês em 2017, e este livro, Economia Donut, uma alternativa ao crescimento a qualquer custo, foi traduzido e publicado no Brasil em 2019. Kate esteve aqui em 2019, fez uma palestra no Unibis Cultural em São Paulo e muitos outros lugares, e ela atualmente dá aula em Oxford, se não me engano, em Cambridge também, e ela está, esta semana que vem, lançando uma coisa que ela vai explicar para a gente o que se chama Action Lab. Kate, muito obrigado por se apresentar de novo para a gente aqui.
Thank you very much indeed, Matthew, for such a generous introduction. I'm honored and I'm really delighted to join everybody here today. Thank you for tolerating me speaking in English. I would love to speak in Portuguese, but I'm not that smart. So I will speak clearly and slowly so that everyone can follow the conversation. And I know we have some great translation with us too. So I'm going to share my screen because I love to share pictures. I believe images are very powerful. They reshape the way we see the world. So I want to use images to tell you about the new paradigm, the new vision for the 21st century that I believe we need to adopt. So here we go. Whoop. I didn't want to start there. Here we are. Let me start here. The donut. It's a ridiculous name. And I know in Brazil, it's called rosquinha. And I even know what that means in Brazil. I know that my colleagues told me that it's called rosquinha and this has another meaning in Brazil. So that's fine. We can talk about the asshole being on fire because we need to live in the donut. So this is the one donut that will turn out to be good for us. I want to start with the long view of the 21st century because it has begun with multiple crises. Financial crisis in 2008. We are living in an era of climate breakdown. We are recently facing COVID lockdown. And these crises are happening in countries rich and poor. They are happening suddenly. People's lives are thrown into chaos often or into real challenge. I believe these crises are all giving us the same message, that we are deeply interconnected with each other and with the living world. and that the economic systems that we create of global interconnection, of endless growth, they actually generate crises out of those very systems. And that these crises are deeply threatening to human well-being. So we need to transform our economic systems so that we are not so vulnerable to crisis after crisis after crisis. How could we do that? And this is why I offer you a donut, the one that is good for us. The goal of this donut is to leave nobody falling short in the hole in the middle of the donut. That's where people have a shortfall of food and water, healthcare, education, housing, political voice, income. And these 12 social dimensions that you see in the middle of the donut, they come from the Sustainable Development Goals. The power of this is that all the governments in the world have already agreed that all the people in the world have a right to these essentials. So leave nobody in the hole, get everybody over that social foundation into the green ring of the donut itself. But there is a big but. We cannot go over the outer ring either, that ecological limit, where we would put so much pressure on our planetary home that we push her out of balance. This is where we cause climate breakdown. This is where we acidify the oceans. We create a hole in the ozone layer. And these 9 dimensions around the outside, these are known as the 9 planetary boundaries. They are recognized by Earth's scientists as the life-supporting systems that make this planet the one known habitable, beautiful, delicately balanced planet for life in the universe. So these are truly sacred. So the aim is to leave nobody falling short in the hole, but don't overshoot the outside. Meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. So we need to find that balance between the two. Now, if we are seeking this balance, the challenge is that we are very far from balance today. This picture and all of the red shows us that millions or billions of people worldwide are falling short on the essentials of life. 11% of people don't have enough food to eat every day. You can see on every one of those social dimensions that red is the shortfall. We want to get rid of all the red from the picture. So there's no more red. So millions of people falling short worldwide, but already we have overshot at least 4 of these planetary boundaries. On climate change, on biodiversity loss, on land conversion, and on using too much phosphorus and nitrogen in fertilizers. So we need to come back as humanity. We need to come into this circle from both sides at the same time. And to me, this picture that we're looking at is the selfie, like a self-portrait of humanity in these early days of the 21st century. We are the first generation to see this. And so it brings responsibility because we have seen a challenge that no generation before us could see with such clarity, such data. We need to transform our global economies so that they meet the needs of all people while coming back within planetary boundaries, and that has never been done before. This is the global picture. I want to show you at the national level. So here are 3 nations. And this is work done by Leeds University. If you look there in the bottom corner, there's a fantastic website, goodlife.leeds.ac.uk. You can see 150 countries. I've chosen just 3. On the one hand, we have Rwanda in Africa. A lot of shortfall in people's lives, but not overshooting any of the planetary boundaries. So how are they going to eliminate the poverty from people's lives? And they still have some room to use Earth's resources to do so. Go to the other end, Australia. Meeting everybody's needs. This is a very low global threshold that we're using here. So it's quite a low standard. And Australia is meeting that standard for all people. But look how much they are overshooting those biophysical limits. They are overshooting on nitrogen, phosphorus, on carbon emissions, the material use, the ecological impact, and land use. And this shows us not just the resources that are used within Australia. This shows us all the resources that are coming to Australia because of the food, the clothing, the electronics, all the things that they're importing into their country. So Australia needs to come back within planetary boundaries while sustaining a good life for its people. And then let's go to the country that all of you are looking at because it's your own, Brazil, in the middle. Brazil is like South Africa, China, many Latin American countries, Costa Rica, many countries. It's both. It's falling short and it's in overshoot. So falling short on meeting the essentials needs of people, that's on life expectancy, on sanitation, on equality of incomes, and on political voice. But it's already overshooting many of the planetary boundaries. So this is calling for, just like the world, meeting everybody's needs, already coming back within planetary boundaries. How can you do that in Brazil? And of course, these three nations have very different income levels. $3,000 in Rwanda, $55,000 per person in Australia, 17 in Brazil. So three very different countries. Now let me show you 150. These are 150 countries, and the aim is to be in that top left-hand corner where the donut is, because this way you meet the needs of all of the people, but do it coming back within those planetary boundaries. Now we can see that there is no country close, and that the countries are in very different positions, but every country needs to transform its journey towards that sweet spot. Here's Brazil. For me, this picture tells me that every country should now think of itself as a developing country, because I cannot think of a single country in the world that can say, yes, we're developed, we've done it, we've arrived. Even the richest countries in the world need to completely redevelop, rethink what they mean by progress from here, because they have a huge transformation to make, just as the poorest countries in the world, just as the emerging economies like Brazil, China, Russia, Turkey, Mexico. Of course, the challenge is how to do this. I want to bring us down another level from the globe to the nation here. Let's come down to the city. Let's think about how do we transform our cities themselves? Because we've been working with a team of people bringing the donut down to the scale of the city. And we invite every ambitious city to ask itself this question. I invite you to think of this question for the city that you know and love. So how can our city be a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? That's a big question. And we can actually break it down into 4 questions that sit underneath it. So think of the city you know and love and reflect on these 4 perspectives. What would it mean for the people of your city to thrive? What is the good life for them, given their culture, their values, their aspiration in life? And how would you know when the people of your city were thriving? Not just some of them, but everybody. So across gender, across race, across income, across age. This is often the question that most cities focus on, but we need to expand beyond this. Let's add, what would it mean for your city to thrive within its natural habitat? So where on planet Earth is your city? Which of nature's biomes and ecosystems is it nestled within? And what is nature doing in this place? Nature has been innovating for 3.8 billion years, and she has found successful strategies in different places. So we can ask, how does nature thrive here? How much carbon dioxide does the wild forest next door to our city sequester every year? How does the forest next door to our city store groundwater after a storm? Could our city do the same? How does the forest next door house biodiversity? Could our city mimic that? How does the forest next door cool the air from the top of the trees to the forest floor? How could our city cool the air like the forest does? So that this is about biomimicry. How can modern cities, or how can cities everywhere mimic the success of nature in this place to make it habitable? Now, these first two perspectives I've shared, they are all local, the local people and the local place. And that's really important to have high aspirations, but we need to add a global perspective, because every city we know is drawing in materials and energy from all around the world and putting out waste and pollution back into it. So next, let's ask, how can our city, that pressure on planet Earth, transforming the food that people eat, the way that people travel, the size of homes that people expect to build, the number of times people buy new clothes, the number of times you buy a new phone, all of this contributes to your city's impact on planetary boundaries. And then let me add the last one. How can your city respect the well-being of people worldwide? Who are the people who assemble the mobile phones we use, who stitch the clothes we wear, who pick and pack the food we eat, who dig the construction materials that we use to make our houses? What wages are they paid? They may be just outside of your city, or they may be on the other side of the world, like these women working in a clothing factory in Bangladesh. Clothes from Bangladesh are on sale in Brazilian cities across the country. So you in your cities are connected to these women in this factory through supply chains. What are the conditions of people who are enabling our lifestyles, and how can they be improved? So these are the four lenses that we use to create a city portrait through the donut, with local aspiration on the top, social and ecological, set in the context of global responsibility, social and ecological. We've just started creating these portraits. The first one was published for Amsterdam in April this year, and you can find it on the internet. This is what it looks like, 4 lenses, and we are diving into the data of what the city aspires to be versus what it actually is today. And in the bottom corner, you can see the red overshoot of Amsterdam's global footprint. So Amsterdam has to get rid of all the red in that picture and come back within its footprint. So you can find Amsterdam's report, it's published. If you're interested, you can even read the methodology of how we did this, because we have made our methodology public too. And I will be showing you at the end of this chat where you can find it. The reason we've published it is because we know that there are change makers everywhere who want to ask these questions for their own city. So we just say, here's the tool, please take it, run with it, make it your own. So Amsterdam, like many cities, and your cities need to transform. What would it mean for a city to transform so it starts to bring us within the donut? We've had conversations about that in Philadelphia, in Portland, and in Amsterdam, where we have downscaled the donut. These pictures show you city policymakers and community groups working together to look at their city's portrait, to see the interconnections between the local and the global, the social and the ecological, and to start coming up with ideas for how they can make the transformation that needs to happen. So what would that mean? How can we come into the donut at the level of the city? I believe there are 2 dynamics that need to be created. We need to create cities that are distributive by design, and that are regenerative by design. And I'm going to just give some examples of what I mean by both of these. So we can contrast systems in cities and indeed in economies that are centralizing by design. They draw all the resources and capture them for a few. They generate opportunity and economic value into the hands of a 1%. And this is this centralizing picture. And we could all think of companies and policies that drive value into the hands of a 1%. But we can also create distributed systems and businesses and cities that share value, that share opportunity, that share space with everyone so that it is far more distributed. Let me give you some examples of distributive design in a city. So the city of Curitiba is very famous worldwide because of this bus system, right? That the buses are moving fast, they're affordable, they're efficient, they go faster than the car. And as I know from the mayor, Jaime Lerner, I believe many years ago, created a system where if people collect trash, they can swap it for bus tokens. So it becomes accessible by many, many more people. I wish I lived in a country that had a bus system like this one. In my country, the bus sits with all the traffic, and there's no advantage to using public transport that can be electric, that can be low carbon. So this kind of public transport first policy is distributive design. In the city of Vienna, this is public housing. And in fact, over 60% of people live in housing that is owned by the city or by cooperatives. It's completely normal to live in and to rent public housing. And that means the rents are controlled by the city. So you have high quality, affordable housing for all. And it's very different from cities in which housing is seen as an investment option for somebody who just wants to get more interest and more return. In Vienna, that's not what housing is for. It's seen as a human right. So you have a much more affordable housing for all. In Medellin, in Colombia, one of the most dangerous and deprived neighborhoods has had built in the middle of it a public library and childcare and community facilities, bringing aspiration and world-class standards to one of the most deprived districts. Again, this is bringing opportunity and sharing value with people who otherwise were cut off from it. And then in Paris, this street here, this used to be a motorway, just cars driving along in the center of the city by the river. They shut it down. This is not COVID, this is permanent. They shut it down and said, let this become a park for the people. And so you're creating shared public spaces, taking cars out, allowing people to come in. And then when people come in, all sorts of cultural creativity happens. And it opens up the commons, that sense of people meeting, connecting, and creating shared value as community. So there's some ideas on distributive design in cities. And I wonder how they connect to the city that you know and love. What about degenerative design? This is a degenerative design. We take Earth's materials, make them into things we want. We use it for a while, often just once. Think of a plastic bottle. And then we throw it away. And this take, make, use, lose is pushing us over planetary boundaries. And this is what it looks like when we take again and again and again from Earth's sources. And this is what it looks like when we throw our waste again and again and again away into the lakes and rivers, the plastic waste and electronic waste in the neighborhood of the world's poorest people. And I really believe that your children and my children will look back at these photographs in 30, 40 years' time and say to us, did you really think that was normal? What were you doing? Because you were destroying our planet and the disrespect for Earth and the disrespect for other people. How could you have thought this was normal? We have to transform this industrial system so that these arrows aren't linear running down, but they are cyclical or circular. And I'm really glad to hear there's going to be a talk on circular economy later in this series, because this is a principle that has to be at the heart of 21st century industry. Separate the biological materials that are alive and the technical materials like plastics and metals and ceramics. Enable nature to regenerate herself. That's what she's been doing for billions of years. But take the technical materials like a smartphone. This should never be thrown away. It should be repaired, refurbished, reused, repurposed, so that the parts can be used again and again and again. We need to mimic nature's circular design. Some examples. In the city of Nairobi, there are huge areas of the community where they have no sanitation services at all. So an enterprise was set up called Sanergy. They created micro toilets throughout the community as a little micro enterprise. The waste is collected every day. It's turned back into manure and fertilizer, and it's applied to the fields. So it's increasing the fertility of the land around Nairobi. This, at the technical level, they are closing the nutrient loop of phosphorus and nitrogen use. But at the community level, they are creating jobs, bringing health, bringing dignity, creating farming opportunities. So it's a really transformative part of the circular economy, very low tech. In Paris and in many cities around the world, people are realizing that the rooftops of buildings are catching solar energy. So either put solar panels on them or grow food on them, but harvest the energy from the sun, creating urban farms that can supply food to communities right there in the city. And then, of course, solar panels across the world, here in Japan, but on households, on rooftops, on buildings, schools, hospitals, across the world. Let's harvest the solar energy from the sky. And then lastly, an amazing building in Amsterdam, which if you look at it, you can see everything is made from natural materials or materials that have been clipped together. In this building, nothing is glued together. Everything is clipped and bolted so that it can be unclipped and unbolted and used again and again and again. All the materials are designed with the idea that they have a future life and must be reusable. This is a circular building. It's also a very beautiful building to be in, as you can see and feel. So let me pull back. These are just some examples of creating distributive design and regenerative design in cities. And I imagine there are so many more examples that are already happening in cities around Brazil. How can we do this together? Well, I wrote this book, Doughnut Economics, but a book is just words on the page, right? And at some point, ideas want to come into action. And what I want to share with you is that we are just about to launch an organization that invites you to join us and change makers around the world to put these ideas into action. So in just over a week, on the 29th of September, we are launching Doughnut Economics Action Lab. This is a sneak preview that you're getting of our website and our platform. If you join the platform, you will see tools and stories. So we've made many, many tools of how to use the Doughnut in classrooms for teachers, in communities for cities, in business, in government. And we've created tools, and we invite you to tell us the tools you would create. We've also created stories of it already being put into action. Stories from Amsterdam, from Portland, from Costa Rica, from Colombia, from the UK, where the Doughnut is already being turned into action. Because what I've learned in this work is that people are most inspired by someone just like themselves. A teacher is inspired by a teacher. A mayor is inspired by a mayor. A community activist is inspired by a community activist. An entrepreneur is inspired by an entrepreneur. So we want to help these people find each other and be inspired by what the other is already doing in bringing humanity into the Doughnut. So I really invite you on the 29th of September to join us, become a member. I'm afraid the platform is just in English at the moment, but if enough of you join, we'll know that we quickly have to get it into Portuguese too, and many other languages. And we really hope this is the beginning of 21st century co-creation. I mean, we don't have time for ideas to belong to somebody or to sit on a shelf and at the back of a long queue. Let's make our ideas open. Let's share these ideas and let change makers pick them up and put them into practice everywhere, because we can't wait to learn what you are doing with these ideas and how you will innovate and adapt and bring them back to this community. So for me, this is the biggest experiment of my life. Can we bring about economic transformation with the donut, with this kind of open collaboration? Join us if you want to help us make that true. I'll stop there, and I really look forward now to the conversation. Thanks very much.
Kate, muito obrigado. Como sempre. Carla? Kate, muito obrigado. Como sempre, uma palestra extremamente inspiradora. Eu vou agora pedir perguntas. Vou começar com a Luciana, do estado de São Paulo. Luciana, você está aí?
Oi, estou aqui. Vocês estão me ouvindo? Hi, Kate. Are you hearing me? Yes? Oh, perfect. Well, Kate, I would like to talk a bit about the role of the companies in this economic transformation. In an interview that you gave for o Estado de São Paulo newspaper, you said that the role of the companies is fundamental and huge. But in Brazil, we see some companies that support sustainability projects. They have a speech in defense of social environment practice, but they continue to devastate the environment. And they are even sanctioned by the courts or by foreign investors who say they won't invest in these companies anymore. Lots of them are huge companies and multinationals. Is this something that happens worldwide, this difference between what they say and what they do, and how to make these companies do what they say that they do, but they don't do it?
This is a really big and very, very important question. Yes, I do believe this happens worldwide. The difference between what companies say on the packet, on the advertisement, on their website, and what they actually do at the ground level at the end of global supply chains. And I've spent much of my life working for Oxfam, campaigning to make this visible, to show the reality of the impact on people and on the living world of companies that want us to believe they are sustainable and good. So yes, and the extractive nature of the companies, right? If, as you just said, if you don't do this, we'll leave, we'll pull out our investments. It's I want to extract, or I'm going to go home. I'm going to go away and leave you. It's a very extractivist mentality that we need to transform. So every time a company comes to me and says, "Hey, we make smartphones, or we make glasses, or we make clothes," we want to talk about bringing our business into the donut. So can we make a product that is in the donut? I always say, look, we can talk about the design of your products. We could talk about whether your product is a regenerative product. We could talk about whether it's a distributive product. But actually, I don't really want to talk about the design of your products. I want to talk about the design of your company, because it's the design of your company that most profoundly shapes what you can do and be in the world. And let me show you what I talk to them about. Always, I use this little signboard. Here we are. I hope you can see. So we say, right, let's start off talking about your purpose. Now, maybe you've written your purpose on your website. It sounds really nice. Oh, our purpose is to be green and sustainable and such. Great. But you know what? You have to have a really clear, powerful purpose. That's the easiest thing to do because you can just write it on your website. Now, let's go down deeper. What are your networks? Who are your customers? And how are you building in your customers the values that you say you want to make in the world so that they know why they're paying more for your product because they value it? Who is in your network of supply? Where are you buying your materials from? Do you know what's happening in your supply chains? And how do you make sure that your suppliers share your values? How do you ensure that you are have integrity throughout the supply chain for what you say you stand to be? Let's go another layer down now into the governance of your company. Who has voice in decision making? And what are the rules and the metrics by which you govern your company? What are the incentives you give to the managers in your company? You know, I often hear people working in companies tell me, my company says they want to become sustainable, but every quarter, every 3 months, I have to show that I have increased profit, increased sales, and increased market share. There is no room for me to become more sustainable, for me to transform, because we are driven by the return on investment, and it's so short-termist that there is no room to think longer. So governance and metrics and incentives are hugely important. Now, these are the easy ones. Now let's go deeper, right? Let's go to the really profound questions. How is your company owned? I mean, who owns this company? Is it owned by a family? By a private entrepreneur? Is it owned by shareholders because it's publicly traded on the stock market? Is it owned by the state? Is it owned by its employees? And these different designs have a profound influence on what sits at the bottom of this signboard, the finance that's coming to your company and what that finance demands. Because if your company is owned in a way that the finance is just there saying, I'm only investing in you because I want the highest, fastest return. And if you're not delivering that quarter on quarter on quarter, then I'm selling, I'm out. That's the kind of ownership and finance that drives the situation you were describing. And these foreign investors who are just there to extract return. Other companies, if they're owned in a different way, sometimes by a family with a big vision, sometimes by employees themselves, sometimes by an entrepreneur who is determined to do things differently. They bring finance that says, I'm investing in you because you are bringing about the transformation in the world that we are both committed to. I want to see social transformation. I want to see environmental transformation. I want to see you regenerate this place through this business. And that's why I'm investing. So there's no one answer to what makes a good design, but all 5 of these design traits need to be aligned. And whether we're working as Sistema B or corporate social governance or sustainability officer in a company, all of this matters. And we know that companies cannot just hire a sustainability officer and expect them to sort things out. They need to be in the boardroom talking about the deep design of the company so that it can be part of transformation.
Kate, thank you very much. I'd like, you mentioned the Sistema B. I'd like to ask Tomás de Lara to come on board and ask you a question, please.
Sure. First of all, Kate, thank you very much for a brilliant talk. It's a great gift for the world you're doing. Thank you very much. I have a question on a city level, and thanks for bringing it, Matthew. Basically, tell us, what does it take to implement a CD donut, and what are the first steps and the key people or players to be engaged in a city level?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. So we believe that the donut is always going to be done best when it's done by the people of the place. So the reason we've published our methodology and we are launching our platform is because we want people in Sao Paulo or in Rio or in London or in Berlin or Kolkata, anywhere, to say, I want to do that here. So we believe it's going to involve change makers in that place who have the energy to make that happen. And it's going to involve the city officials to connect with the policies, to influence them, to bring them in. And it might involve, if you really want to collect data, you might want to involve some academia who can bring the data. So that connection of the three, for me, is the starting point. What we've found in the city of Amsterdam, actually, was when we did the city portrait with them, the city government came back and they said, you know, we realized that if we are going to really bring about this revolution in our own city, we need to change our own institutions. And in fact, we did a workshop with the government exactly using this. Okay, what's the purpose of the city government? What are you here for? What does success look like? What are the networks you have with other cities, with your suppliers, with your citizens? How are you governing yourselves? Do you give voice to the citizens in this city? How is the city owned? Who owns the land? Who owns the buildings? Who owns the businesses in this city? Who owns the data that's being generated every day? And again, how is the city financed? Where's the money coming from? And what is that money demanding to do? So it takes us again into the deep design questions. We are starting to see city portraits being initiated in places all over the world. They're going to be done differently everywhere. In the city of Brussels, in Belgium, they are doing it in a very participatory way. And they say, we want to use this to have deep conversations with citizens, led by citizens, looking at the connection between gender and housing and carbon dioxide emissions and labor rights. So connections we never saw before. So they're doing it in a very participatory way. Other cities are going to do it from the data and come up with the metrics. So it can be done in so many ways. The idea is that if you see that it could be useful for your own holistic thinking, please take this tool and make it your own and come back and tell us how you've done it, because I have no doubt other places will be so inspired and will follow and copy what you did.
Obrigado, Kate. O Ricardo, você pode fazer uma pergunta, por favor? Ricardo, você está aí?
Estou iniciando o vídeo. Kate, first of all, thank you very much. It was a great talk, very inspirational. The question I will do is, some of your ideas, the Doughnut economy is a great catalyzer. And we can see some of the ideas that are there for 2-3 decades in your Doughnut. We can talk about the contributions of Donella Meadows, Tim Jackson, Jared Diamond, finally the SDGs, and why we're talking about these changes, the limit of growth, the necessity to finish inequality in the world for so many decades, and why it's not happening. And why we should think that the Doughnut theory can bring something new to this.
Oh, a great question, Ricardo. So right here, I have 1972 copy of The Limits to Growth, right? This was published when I was 1 year old. And as you just said, this book contains the transformation. It contains the paradigm that I'm talking about, right? There's the donut. The thinking is already in here. So why is this taking so long? So let me start with the good news. What we have done since this. One thing that we now have is the outside of the donut. Wait, I've got it here. We have the outside of the donut, right? In this book, they knew there were limits of pressure on the planet, but they didn't know what they were. They called it pollution. Maybe greenhouse gas emissions, maybe carbon dioxide emissions, but pollution would become a problem. But they didn't have the science that we now have, that these are the key Earth systems that keep our planet healthy. We know so much more and we can measure it. We're on climate change. We are at 415 parts per million already concentration. We're way over the planetary boundaries. So the advantage we have this century is we have the metrics, we have the science, we have much more knowledge. That's one thing. Two, I think we have many, many more shocks. So back in 1972, there were not wildfires in California like we are seeing today. They did not go through the same financial meltdown. There was the oil price shock in 1973, but that was created by countries. That was a choice some countries made. But the shocks that we're experiencing now, financial crisis, climate change, COVID, these are generated by this system. And I think they are generated by a system that tries to pursue endless growth. So those are things that have changed. Now, let's be honest, and a lot of things have stayed the same. And I can be pessimistic and say, this has been known for decades. We're just bringing the same information again and again. In fact, I love a quote from André Gide, who said, everything that needs to be known is already known. But since nobody was listening, it has to be said again. And sometimes I think that's what I'm doing. It was already here. I'm just saying it again. But is there something happening now? We have the digital tools. We can connect like this on this conversation. We as Doughnut Economics Action Lab next week can launch a platform that everybody in this conversation and worldwide can tap into and start using these tools. We know that change makers are springing up everywhere. So I can't say I'm an optimist. I don't say, oh, it's going to be fine. No, it's really not going to be fine. We have to be activists. We have to lean in and make it happen. And we have tools and knowledge and understanding of the price we pay if we don't make it happen. That means that our generational responsibility is to make these people know that their work was worth it, and we built on it and we took it a step further, and let us be the ones who transform this system and come up with new visions and new possibilities. So I'm an activist. I'm not a pessimist or an optimist. I'm an activist. And this for me is the life work.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Kate, can we stay on for another 10 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Luciana, your turn.
Yes, Kate, I understand that there are more shocks nowadays than 30 years ago, and you said that you are an optimist, but and I know that we are living a moment with strong social movements such as Black Lives Matter or Extinction Rebellion, but we also experiencing a period in which many populist and nationalist presidents are in power, presidents that are not very famous for the environment or sustainable policies. We saw the United States leave the Paris Agreement. Brazil also doesn't show signs of commitment with this agreement. So why with this scenario, is it possible to believe that the world will move towards a Doughnut economy?
So yeah, that we can definitely look around the world and look at leaders. I was going to say in Brazil, in the United States, certainly in the UK. I am not at all in favor of or proud of the leadership of the government of my country right now. So we can lose hope. Yeah, we could lose hope because the leaders, these populist leaders, often tap into a very simple message, right? I show you the donut and the complexity of that. And so Donald Trump just says, build that wall, because sometimes people feel overwhelmed by complexity and it's much easier to go with a very simple message. One thing that fascinates me, if I think of countries that did not handle the COVID crisis well, like when a real crisis happens, you cannot deal with it with words. And the government of your country in Brazil, the United States, and the UK, all of these leaders said, nah, it won't happen here. It's not a thing here. We've got it under control. And our three countries have had among the worst death rates and impacts of this crisis. So first of all, I hope that people notice that populist leaders cannot bring down the infection rate of COVID-19 with words. You need good, competent government. I also think it's interesting to notice that many of the countries that have coped best with COVID have women leaders. There's something interesting about a more deliberative, less populist leader who's taking smart decisions. So yes, we can feel very dark in our soul when we look at what governments are doing and the destruction that they're allowing. And then we must just remember history, that there have been times in history when it looked very, very bad, and change happens. As Nelson Mandela said, it's always impossible until it's done. So I choose to put my energy not into expecting the worst because I see bad leadership in government. I put my energy into trying to make that impossible possible, because I totally believe that things can change in ways we never expected. And thank goodness we have elections. If we can transform that election, we can change that leadership and start turning it around. This is why I'm not an optimist, but I refuse also to be a pessimist, because if we just become pessimist, we allow it to happen. You have to be an activist.
Thank you, Katie.
Gente, a Kate vai ficar mais alguns minutos com a gente. Nós já estamos estourando o tempo. Então, Tomás, eu vou pedir uma última pergunta para você, por favor.
Beleza. Yes. Hello, Kate. One question about SDGs at the city level and SDG at the city Donut, right? You may have heard about the SDG Action Manager, which is a new tool that United Nations Global Compact, together with the B Corps movement, they created together, is an online tool to assess the actions of a company towards the SDGs. So my question is, how does the city Donut integrates with the SDGs, and how can this integration be a bridge to bring about companies to act together with citizens, with City Hall and other activists and everybody to really push forward SDGs and a better sustainable city?
Great point. So first of all, let me say that the SDGs and the donut are cousins. They're like cousins, right? They're related. So I first drew the donut in 2012, a first version of it. And that was before the SDGs existed. And when the SDGs were being negotiated in 2015, somebody who was inside those negotiations told me, you know, we had a picture of the donut on the table in the meeting room, because in the last minutes of the negotiation, when countries suddenly become very narrow and they're haggling over small words, somebody said, hey, let's keep the big picture on the table. What are we actually trying to achieve here? We're trying to meet social needs within the planetary limits. So I was really honored to find out that the donut had been there at the birth of the Sustainable Development Goals. When the Sustainable Development Goals came out, I then made a new donut, which is why these dimensions in the middle are from the SDGs. So it's sourced from them. But the outside is not from the SDGs. This is stronger science. This is based in planetary boundaries. And I'll tell a story. I know that when the SDGs were being created, the first draft of them had discussion of planetary boundaries inside. And as the conference, it was a Rio +20 conference, as it came closer and closer to the conference, bigger and bigger ministries come closer and they say, what is this planetary boundaries? I don't like that word. That limits my development. Take that language out. And the language of planetary boundaries was removed from the process because governments, politicians did not want those concepts there. So I think the SDGs got softened a little bit, especially on the environmental story. The donut does not allow that. The donut holds you to planetary boundaries. So I could say it's a tougher standard, and it holds everything in one shape. But let me come back and say they're connected. And some people like to dance to classical music, and some people like to dance to Jimi Hendrix. But as long as everybody's dancing, that's okay. Now, some people want to do the SDGs. Fantastic. If you commit to doing the SDGs in your city or in your company, you will be transforming and you will go on that journey. And a lot of people say, you know what, I'm not that excited about the SDGs, but I really want to do the donut. Fine, then let's do the donut. If you do the donut, you are definitely doing the SDGs. So I see them as cousin concepts. I'm going to add one last point. Inside the SDGs, just when they were getting created, at the same time that the government said, please remove the mention of planetary boundaries, I don't like the sound of that, they also added in a target on growth. So under SDG 8, this target for growth. Now, I know the reason it was added in was because lower income countries were worried, very understandably, that if we say we have to limit our use of Earth's resources, that they would never have that right. So putting in economic growth in the SDGs was like recognizing the right to development. And I absolutely believe that low income countries need to grow and develop in order to meet people's needs. What I hear when I go to some of the richest cities in the world that are doing the SDGs, they say, one of the SDG goals is economic growth. So we must have economic growth. And they take it in the richest countries in the world that are richer than any country has ever been before. They say, because it's written in the SDG, this must also be our goal. They use it to justify continuing to pursue growth. And I worry that they will put that one first. Let's pursue growth. Let's not worry so much about the planetary SDGs because they're a bit too hard. So it's a danger that it allows the growth-based, endless growth paradigm to carry on without really driving the transformation.
Yeah, very good point. And a short commentary on it. We are talking with Daniel Christian Wall, that I'm sure you know, and all the people from Schumacher College. I think the direction should be a growth of quality rather than quantity, right? So the 8th SDG could be more focused on maturity of the economy rather than quantity and volume, right? What do you think about maturity of the economy?
Yeah, so what's going to grow? I have 11-year-old children, right? I have twins. They're 11 years old. They are growing so fast in height. It's beautiful because they're young and that means life, right? And they're growing. But at some point, really, I hope they stop growing taller because otherwise they won't fit in my house. But they will continue to grow as people in maturity, in interest, in knowledge. So yes, growth transforms. The problem is, Thomas, as you know as well as I, that if we have companies that are owned in a way that brings finance, they say, no. The reason I'm here is for my money to grow. If the purpose is just a nice sounding thing, I'm here for my finance to grow. And it totally depends. Some family firms are very happy to grow and say, now we're big enough. This is all we need to be. We've grown up. Now let's be a fabulous company. And then other companies, often shareholder-owned companies or venture capital-driven companies, we are here to grow and then grow again, and then grow again, and then grow again. So it always comes back down to the design as to whether that company will accept that it needs to grow up and mature, or it will demand to grow endlessly. And so long as we have business and economies that are structured on the expectation of endless growth, they will say, that sounds very nice, Thomas, to have growth and quality, but come on, I want my money.
Okay, uma última pergunta, one last question. Ricardo, você encerra a gente?
Yes, thank you. A very brief comment in what Thomas and you just put to us. When Donella Mida said, it's not a matter of growth, but a matter of having enough. I think we have a good clue there. What's enough for the developing countries? This is something that we should think about. My last question, Kate, is you're a world citizen and you're looking what's happening in the world in several countries. And isn't it strange that the more the civil society realize and get aware of the importance of sustainable development, the politicians are going back and really becoming a big danger They are jeopardizing the possibility of having a better world. How do you explain this phenomenon, this threatening even democracy? How do you explain this reaction? And how big this reaction can be to become a real impediment to sustainable development?
So in honesty, Ricardo, I would love to hear your answer to that question, because I can tell from the way you ask it that you have some really good thoughts about it. I'll just say that I agree that, but think of when a system is coming to a pressure point and something needs to change, then you get contradictions in the system. Like if we are like Donella Meadows and we're systems thinkers, she'd say, yeah, when a system is close to that pressure point, it's going to make a shift. You're going to get extreme politics, and you're going to get a massive gap between the awareness of much of civil society and then many other people who reject that because they're afraid of it, and they're afraid of the complexity and of having to recognize our interconnection. And that's why Donald Trump saying build that wall works for so many people, because it's comforting to have an apparently simple solution that will apparently just solve this and make it go away. And then there are many other people who say, no, we have to go deeper and recognize the systemic problems behind it. So I think just as the populists tune their message and learn to use simple phrases, build that wall, then we need to create compelling pictures like two circles that are equally compelling to people and that draw a next generation. I'm very honored that for the first time this year, this diagram has been included in the textbook of economics taught in the International Baccalaureate. So any student who is studying the IB at international schools around the world, they're being taught this. In fact, I've been getting phone calls from the children of friends of mine who, oh, we're being taught your donut in our economics class. Now, for me, it's a tiny thing, and yet it's a big thing, because it's beginning to be introduced to the next generation as part of the curriculum, as part of the way of thinking. And we need to make these ideas more and more seen and understood, so that we just build the critical mass we need, so that we vote in the politicians that we deserve and that the future deserves. Fight that fight and keep being the best. Make it irresistible. Make this the better party.
Kate, muito obrigado. Sua fala, como sempre, foi muito inspiradora. Eu sei que, quando eu digo isso, eu falo por todo mundo que assistiu aqui no Brasil. E eu queria agradecer, e eu vou passar agora para encerrar para a Carla.
And thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's an honor to join you.
Thank you. Carla, are you there? Você está?
Estou aqui, Ricardo. Você está me ouvindo?
Estou ouvindo.
Foi realmente incrível. A gente podia passar 2 semanas direto falando sobre esse assunto com a Kate, né? Gente, eu quero agradecer cada um de vocês pela companhia, por dividir esse conhecimento com a gente, Kate. Eu quero agradecer também, especialmente a todos vocês que estão aí do outro lado, acompanhando a nossa programação. E peço para que vocês se inscrevam aqui no nosso canal no YouTube, também sigam as nossas redes sociais, para vocês não perderem absolutamente nada desse conteúdo incrível que está só começando aqui na Virada Sustentável. Aliás, no Instagram, vocês postem, repostem, marquem as hashtags Vire Sua Cidade, Virada Sustentável e por aí vai. Bom, gente, a gente se encontra agora de novo no dia 21 de setembro, lá para falar sobre economia circular. Mas eu quero fechar esse nosso primeiro momento aqui, relembrando essa frase que me impactou e com certeza impactou muitos de vocês aí, frase da Kate. Não sou otimista, não sou pessimista, sou ativista. Que mensagem, hein? A gente se encontra no dia 21. Tchau!